Morning, everyone. We are in the second week of our series, Out of Context. What did God really say? And like we mentioned last week, throughout this series we'll be looking at a verse that commonly gets taken out of context or misused, and looking at what it's actually saying, which today that verse is Philippians 4:13. We'll read that in a second if you want to go ahead and turn there. But almost everybody here knows what it feels like to be running on empty at some point, right? Either physically or mentally or emotionally or even spiritually. Life kind of has a way of draining people. Stress builds up. Circumstances change. And eventually it leaves us asking, how do we keep going when life gets hard? And that's really the question Paul is answering in our verse today in Philippians 4. That he wrote this while he was under arrest. And he's explaining how he's learned to stay content in every kind of situation. And the answer wasn't waiting for better circumstances, but we'll soon see what it was. So, like I mentioned, our verse is Philippians 4:13, which says, I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me. And you've probably heard this verse a lot. But I would venture to say a lot of the times you've heard it, they were kind of misusing it. Because a lot of times it's used as kind of this motivational quote more than a verse of, oh, I'm going to run this race and I'm going to win and crush my best time. And I can do that because Christ strengthens me. Or I want this job or this promotion or this raise and I'm going to achieve that because Christ strengthens me. Or I'm going to exercise a lot and lose all this weight through him who's giving me strength. And the list of those things can be endless, where they use it as motivation to achieve their own lofty goals or their own personal achievements. But really, Paul's not talking about achievement at all here. What he's really talking about is what we're going to be talking about today, which is being content through Christ. Being content through Christ. Paul's not talking about achievement or reaching our personal goals. He's talking about being content. You see, the book of Philippians is a letter Paul wrote to the Philippian church while he was under arrest. And this is the last chapter of the book, and he's winding it down. He's thanking this church for the support they give him and gifts they've sent him. But he explains that while he appreciates those things greatly, his joy and his stability aren't rooted in them. They're not rooted in the circumstances of his current life. He shares that through what he's learned, he shares that he's learned to be content in the highs and the lows in life, and in abundance and in hardship. And that leads right up to verse 13, which we just read, where he says, that's when he says, I can do all things through Christ. And he's not talking about I can do anything I want. He's saying through all these things I just mentioned, I can stay content, I can stay faithful because I have Christ. Being close to God and enduring spiritual hardship or distance, or whether you're near to him and you feel like you're on fire, and everything in between those, that contentment, that ability to stay content is what he's sharing about and what we're going to be talking about today. And the first thing that goes in to biblical contentment through Christ is to stop looking around. Stop looking around. Comparison is a really easy thing for us to fall into, and it may not seem like it's anything bad, but it can actually be really damaging. Comparison can be a thief of joy. It can kill contentment. And when we start looking at what others have and comparing it to what we don't have, or look at success others are getting and compare that to the success we want, or compare it to the fact that we feel stuck in the same place, and so on. First off, comparison like that is never a fair comparison, because with other people, you're seeing what they want you to see. And with you, you're seeing everything, and you probably focus on the things you don't like. You don't see what other people are hiding the way you see what you're hiding. But also, there will always be someone that has more, whether it's more money or better circumstances or better opportunities. That's why we need to learn to stop looking around for contentment, because if our mindset is, I'll be content when my life looks like theirs, we'll never reach that. There will always be another person that we want to look like next. And the truth is, as humans, we naturally drift towards comparison. It's easy to slip into that without realizing it. Comparison is in our nature. I know I fall into that a lot. We compare jobs and families and vacations and so on. And social media and the internet has made that even easier. And our tendency towards that is even worse in today's day and age with things like the internet, because we have this highlight reel of everyone's life and get to see all their good times right at our fingertips. And we have to fight that urge to compare and turn away when we find ourselves giving into that urge. And that won't just happen on its own. It will be hard. It will require effort. And it will require us to be intentional about it. But if we don't do that and we don't resist that urge to compare, it won't be long before our focus is off Christ completely and is on everyone around us. Like I said, it's true, comparison is in our human nature. But if we go back to Paul and his context and what he was writing about, he's not doing that. He's quite literally under arrest. He was on house arrest, waiting for trial in Rome. And yet he's not sitting there feeling sorry or playing this comparison game. He's not sitting there writing about how much easier Peter had it or how much success John was having spreading the word. And he wasn't wondering how anyone else's ministry was going. Paul understood, and this is what he's writing about, that true contentment doesn't come from having the easiest or best circumstances compared to others. It comes from Christ and having him in every aspect of our lives and having him with us through all those circumstances. Whether we have a little or a lot, he helps us be content in every situation. And Paul realized that being content comes from having Jesus with us. The problem with comparison also is that it stifles gratitude. The same way plants can't grow when there's weeds in the ground taking up the soil's nutrients, gratitude can't grow in a place where comparison is constantly living and constantly pointing out that those around us have it better. In those instances where comparison is allowed to live, we tend to only see what we think we're missing instead of being thankful and being gratitude and having gratitude for what we have. I'm not good at talking. Oh well. But we need to focus on God's provision and how faithful he's been and that he's with us through it all. Back in high school, I ran cross country all 4 years. I did 3 sports. It's the only one I did all 4 years. And one thing I learned quickly is if you're constantly looking around at what the other runners are doing, which was an easy trap for me to fall into, especially like early on, freshman year, that doesn't work very well. You get out of your stride, you get out of your rhythm and under your own strategy, which was hard for me. When someone would be passing me, I'd want to look behind me and see how close they are when I heard them coming, or focusing on the people up ahead. But you lose rhythm, you lose momentum that way. Coaches are constantly to the side of the course telling the runners to keep their eyes forward, because when you look around, it throws off your stride and it throws off everything you're trying to do. But a lot of times as Christians, we're living that way spiritually. We spend so much time looking around us at everyone else's life that we lose sight of what God has called us to. We compare success or opportunities or relationships or circumstances to everyone else around us, and that comparison slowly steals our ability to be content. Paul learned that you cannot faithfully run your race if you're obsessed with everyone else's. God did not call us to compare our life to someone else's. He called us to faithfully run the course ahead of us through Christ and having him with us. If there are things in your life that you know trigger comparison, cut back on those. If you know there's something in your life that tends to cause a comparison mindset, take action and address that thing. Cut back on it, or maybe cut it out completely if you need to. Don't just ignore that trigger. Practice showing gratitude each day for the things you do already have, not just when they happen to pop into your mind, but be intentional. Make it a point to thank God each and every day for the family we have, the roof over our head, the food we have in our fridge, and so on. Even the very breath we breathe, we can and should be thanking him for that. And when we do this, and when we do it intentionally, it'll help us start to realize how much he's given us and how faithful he's been. And we'll start to be finding more and more things to be thankful for each day when we get into that mindset. And when other people around you do have good things happen to them, instead of giving into that urge to compare or wish it was you, be happy for them. Celebrate with them that they're experiencing good things. The second thing that's important if we truly want to be content in life and be content through Christ is don't depend on circumstances. Don't depend on your circumstances. Throughout his life, Paul experienced every end of the spectrum on this one. He knew what it was like to have a lot and have abundance. And he knew what it was like to have very little and be in need. And throughout his ministry even, he experienced both. There were times where he went to speak where he was welcomed and provided for and encouraged. And there were times where Paul went to speak where he was met with hostility or was beaten or chased out or left hungry. But in our verse he wrote, and in the verses leading up to it, Paul states that he's learned the secret of being content through all of that. And that through all of these things he went through, he's learned the secret to being content. It isn't something that comes up and appears when life is going great. It's something we learn when we're constantly and consistently spending time with Jesus and he's with us through everything. And when he's what we depend on, not depending on good circumstances to come around the corner. Our circumstances in life are constantly changing. We go through so many different seasons in life. And so because of that, our circumstances can't be our foundation. They can't be what we allow to decide if we're content in life or not. Because if that's our foundation and that's what we allow to decide our contentment, that'll be fluctuating constantly. Life will never feel stable, like a stock market going up and down or something along those lines, because our circumstances change so rapidly. If our peace and us feeling content in life is dependent on our circumstances, it will always, and dependent on life going well, it will always be rising and falling. But if we root our peace and our ability to be content in Jesus and in his constant presence in our lives, we'll feel much more stable. Jesus will always be there. He will never abandon us. And he wants that relationship with us and wants to be there for us. So as long as we're pursuing him and putting effort into that relationship with him, he'll be there and he'll walk alongside us through everything. If we make that intentional decision to anchor our peace and anchor our contentment in him, eventually we'll learn what Paul learned here, and we'll learn that being content in any and every situation, we'll learn how to do that, and it's because of Christ. When we go through hard seasons in life, that's going to happen. It's a fact of living on earth. We'll have hard seasons, but when we do, in those seasons, it can be tempting to drift away from God and not put as much effort or focus on your relationship with him, or put distance between you even. And it can be easy to be upset with God for allowing those things to happen. But that's what Satan wants. Paul, he learned to be content and anchor that in Christ through the good seasons and the bad, not just the good. And we need to make sure we're clinging to him and holding on tight in those bad seasons, because that's when we need him most. You know, for a lot of years, my mom and I had season passes to Six Flags St. Louis. And I look back on those days with just such fondness, so many great memories. I'll get sidetracked for a second, because funny story. One food I like, and this will surprise you guys, I like black bean burgers, like veggie burgers. And you guys make fun of me for not liking vegetables, so I can only imagine what's running through your head. But here's how I discovered I like those. Part of our season passes, we had these dining passes, so we got like 1 or 2 meals and a snack. And I ordered that as one of my meals one day at Six Flags, legitimately just to see how my mom would react when I told her I ordered it. I had no idea if I was going to like, and I ended up liking it. I've ordered them at restaurants a few times since, but The veggie burgers aren't the point. But one thing I also liked there was roller coasters, because they have a bunch of them there, metal ones, wood ones. They have one called the Screaming Eagle that's actually celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. I like that one. It's not my favorite. My favorite one is the Boss, which is up here, which is ginormous, and it's tall and fast and wood. I like the wood ones better for some reason. And my mom, I had to wait in line for those alone. My mom has really bad motion sickness, so roller coasters were not her thing. But roller coasters are like that. They're up, they're down, they're fast. They take sharp turns. For a lot of people, our spiritual lives are like that roller coaster. We feel close to God when things are going well, but we're rooted in our circumstances and those seasons that are changing. So when things stop going well, we feel further away from Him, and you feel like you're on a wild ride, and when hardship comes, it crashes, and peace disappears, and faith weakens, and discouragement takes over when those hard seasons hit. But Paul learned something deeper. His joy was not attached to comfort or success or stability. He had learned to be content in abundance and in need. He had learned to be content in hunger and in fullness, which means his faith wasn't riding that roller coaster of depending on circumstances, because his strength was rooted in Christ instead of temporary situations. A lot of people want God to remove all those dips and turns and tall drops from the track, but Paul tells us that Christ gives us the strength to make it through all those seasons. Don't let the bad days and the bad seasons control your faith. That can be really easy to do, especially when a bad day turns into a bad week, and that turns into a bad month, and so on. But when we're in the middle of those storms is when we need our faith and need that relationship with Him most, because that's what gets us through it. When we're having a bad day or a bad week, set aside time to stop and pray. Spend time with the Lord. Spend time in the Word and worship and in conversation with Him, however you feel closest to Him. The flip side of that coin is that when we're having a good day or a good week and things are going well, we can't let that dictate things either. In bad seasons, we need to depend on God, and it's more obvious to us that we do. But we need to depend on Him in the good times too. And a lot of times when things are going well, we don't realize that we still need to depend on Him. Still spend that daily time purposely and intentionally being close to Him. That's when our peace and contentment begins to shift from being rooted in our circumstances to being rooted in Him. When we're purposely focusing on deepening our relationship with Him and putting our dependence and our reliability into Him instead of in our circumstances. It's easy to cling to God and stay faithful when things are going well. It's harder to stay faithful when the bad and hard seasons hit. But like we said, we need Him just as much in one as we do in the other. So we do need to consistently be staying faithful through everything with intentional effort. Spend time in the Bible every day. Spend time praying and meditating over what you read. Spend time worshiping. Make this time a daily thing and make it non-negotiable. It can be really easy to just think, oh, I'll skip it this one day or I'll move it till later because I have a busy schedule. But once you do it, move that once, it can be easier to do it a second time and then a third time. And before you know it, you haven't spent your time with the Lord in like a week. So set that time aside and make it non-negotiable. The third thing, we're talking about being content, right? So we stopped looking around us. We stopped depending on our circumstances. Now we start relying on Christ. Start relying on Christ. Like we said earlier, this verse isn't about achievement the way it gets used. It's about endurance. It gets quoted all the time, like we said, or I can achieve this thing because this verse says so. But the whole point of this series we're doing is that context is key. Context is key. So think about what we've talked about with the context leading up to this verse, and a lot of what we've talked about with Paul to this point. He had been in and out of prison a few times. He faced hostility in a lot of places and was also welcomed in other places. And if you know Paul's story, before God got a hold of him and he started spreading the message of Christ, he actually persecuted and killed Christians. So I can imagine that especially early on, Paul also faced a lot of crowds that were nervous to come near him or didn't believe him or maybe thought he was setting a trap of some sort. Paul faced all of this and probably more than we can imagine. So when we get to Philippians 4:13 and he says he can do all things through Christ, and he's talking about how he's learned to stay content through all of it, this isn't some motivational quote where Paul's saying he can accomplish any dream he wants to. It's him pointing out to the context that he's been through in his service to the Lord and all the ups and downs that have come with that Christ gives him the strength to endure all that he's been through and all he will go through. This is less of a victory verse and more of a verse that says, just keep on going, keep enduring. And as Dory and Nemo would say, just keep swimming. So, where did this ability come from? Paul wasn't just this naturally fearless, emotionally unshakable superhero of a person. But what he did was he relied on Christ. On his own, Paul would have burned out from sin and burned out a long time ago. Between the prison and the persecution and the rejection and the loss, anyone would have burned out on our own. But Paul was able to keep going and keep pushing through and keep doing great things for God and for his kingdom because his strength was coming from the Lord. Paul knew he wasn't relying on his own talent or his own confidence or his own determination by itself. He was relying on Christ, which is a lot more powerful than anything we can ever bring to the table and rely on for ourselves. Christianity, it's not about, and never has been about, being strong enough or pretending to be strong enough. It's actually kind of the opposite. It's about recognizing our own shortcomings, recognizing that we aren't enough, and depending on Jesus and relying on him. Sometimes we think that we only need God and only need to rely on him in the hard seasons. But like we said, that's not true. Like we said earlier, we need him just as much in the good as we do in the bad. It's just not as obvious to us that we need him in the good. On our own strength, we'll falter quickly, even if we have a best season, best circumstances we've ever had. We'll falter eventually on our own. We need to rely on him and depend on him through the good and the bad, not just in the bad, not just when we feel ourselves burning out and feel that need for him, but all the time. Whether Paul was sitting in a prison cell or at a full dinner table, Christ was always enough for Paul. We definitely can and should look to Paul for an example on this, because we all face ups and downs in life. We all go through good and bad seasons in life. And we need to learn to rely on Christ and let him be enough through all of those circumstances. It's also important to note here, biblical contentment doesn't mean we have to pretend everything is okay and fine all the time. It's okay to not be okay. Paul never says that the hardship or suffering he faced was easier, that he enjoyed going through that. Being content doesn't mean being happy in every circumstance. It means we have a firm belief that Christ is enough and he's sufficient for us no matter what the season we're going through is, even if it's a season that we don't like going through. Those seasons, those earthly things, those stabilities like comfort or success or money, they fluctuate, they go up and down. But Christ doesn't do that. Christ doesn't fluctuate. He's steady and solid and forever unchanging. That right there is why Paul could sit in a prison cell or sit in house arrest and still have peace and still remain faithful to God through all of it, because his confidence wasn't in those circumstances. He wasn't just waiting, sure that better seasons would come around. That confidence was rooted that he had Jesus with him. When Jesus becomes enough for us, being content in every season becomes possible and becomes a lot more clear to get to. An extension cord doesn't have any power by itself. You can stretch it all the way across a room or wrap it around equipment and plug in all kinds of things to it. But if that cord isn't connected to a power source, it's useless. The cord itself doesn't have energy. It doesn't have power. It simply receives power from the thing you connect it to. That's a picture of what Paul's talking about here in Philippians 4:13. Paul's saying his strength was not self-generated. He's saying, I am mentally tough enough. He's not saying, I'm mentally tough enough to handle this. He's saying that Christ is the source of my strength, and it's the source of ours too. Paul could endure hardship and hunger and suffering and everything that he went through serving the Lord because he was connected to Christ, and for that reason alone. A lot of us try to live this life, try to walk with Christ unplugged. We try to handle stress or temptation or anxiety and hardship through our own strength and our own abilities. And eventually we'll all fail doing that. We'll all burn out because we were never meant to do it on our own abilities. The strength to remain faithful and content and steady through every season comes from staying connected to Jesus, and it comes from that alone. Just like that extension cord completely relies on the outlet you plug it into, our source of power as believers depends entirely on Christ. We're nothing without Him. Like we said, we need to make sure we're relying on Christ daily, not just in crisis, but make it a point to establish a connection with Him on a personal level. Get to know the Lord. We talked earlier about setting aside time each day for spending time with Him and spending time in His Word. But going beyond that, seek His guidance, seek His input in every decision you make, not just the ones that feel big and difficult and life-changing. But when we seek Him out in everything, that will strengthen our relationship with Him and will strengthen our bond and strengthen our ability to be content through all the circumstances like we're talking about. When you're in the hard seasons, don't just pray for it to be over. Pray for God to give you the strength to persevere through it. That shift in mindset is huge. It shifts us from feeling like we're just barely trying to survive till it's over and wait till the storm is over, to actively feeling like the Lord will get us through it and fight back against the storm. Learn to say Christ is enough. It can be easy to want more. See the spots in your life where you feel like you're lacking or where things are tight. But part of relying on Him, part of fully depending on Him, is that we need to train ourselves and train our minds to have full faith that He will provide and trust that He will give us what we need when we need it. But we need to be content through Christ in life. That's key. So, as we close today, I think one reason this verse gets misunderstood so much is because we usually picture it in moments of victory. Athletes quoting it after a championship, or some actor posts a picture of this verse after they win an award, or like we talked about earlier, people using it as a motivational slogan before accomplishing something. But as we've talked about today, that's not what Paul was intending when he wrote these words. Paul was under Roman house arrest. He'd experienced hunger and hardship and uncertainty and suffering. And yet he could still say, I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. Paul wasn't talking about the power to achieve anything he wanted. He was talking about the strength to remain faithful in every circumstance, in every situation. And honestly, some of the people who understand this verse best are probably not the people standing on stages after victories or holding trophies. Sometimes it's the people that understand it best are the people who keep trusting God through the sickness, through the loneliness, through the grief or financial stress or disappointment or whatever it may be. That they go through all that and that they still remain faithful. They still worship, they still pray, and they still trust Christ through all that they went through. That's the kind of strength Paul is talking about here, the strength to endure. Not the strength to avoid hardship, but the strength to endure hardship and push through that through Christ. So when life changes, when you go through hard seasons, and it will change, you will go through hard times, don't spend life looking around at everybody else. Don't build your peace based on waiting for good circumstances to come around. Because when the hard seasons come around, then you fall off a cliff. Don't build your peace on circumstances that are changing. Rely on Christ instead. Because contentment for us is not found in having everything we want. It's found in knowing that Christ is enough through every season. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your Son, for everything both of you do for us, and the breath you give us. And thank you for Paul and all that he went through and all we can learn from him. And I pray that you help us remember these lessons Paul taught us this week about contentment as we go throughout our week. Amen.
Please stand.